welcome you to the meeting of Committee for Infrastructure. Different day, different venue, but you're all very welcome. I just wait and see if there's anyone from public comment. No. Okay. Brief overview then of today's business is the departmental evidence session in the scrutiny programme for government. Have we any apologies, Clark?
Declan McAleer.
Any from the floor? No? Okay. Okay then, departmental evidence session, scrutiny programme for government. This meeting will be Hansarded, but if I'm correct, will not be recorded by camera. Okay, members, just so that you're aware then, can I just say to those in the public gallery that all electronic devices should be switched to Wi-Fi only on an airplane mode, not 3G or 4G. In addition, all devices should be muted. Members, at page 4 is the draft programme for government framework 2016-21. Page 116 is the committee, the executive office programme for government 2016-2021. Page 135, the Construction Employers Federation programme for government response. 150, the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People programme for government advice to government. And page 221 is the Northern Ireland Independent Retail Trade Association. There's a request to brief the committee, which the clerk will deal with later. Departmental correspondence is tabled at page 3, the programme for government action plans, and tabled at page 5 is the committee for the executive office draft programme for government 2016-21, and tabled at page 9 is the programme for government delivery plan indicators 23, 25 and 47. So at this stage, can I welcome Mr. John McGrath, Deputy Secretary from the Department, Mr. Tom Reid, Director of Transport Policy, Strategy and Legislation, and Anne Tohill, Programme Manager for the Programme for Government. Your nameplate was being obscured there by the water jug, Anne, so you're all very welcome. And I'll hand over to you for a presentation, and if you have any questions, if you're happy to take them. Thank you.
Okay, sure. It's a game of two halves this afternoon. With colleagues with us, we will talk about the water element of the delivery plan. In terms of the transport element, we very much welcome this early opportunity to brief the committee with details of the work we've undertaken over the last few months to develop the Minister's delivery plan. The purpose of the plan is to set out in further detail the actions which we, along with our delivery partners, propose to take forward in line with the outcomes outlined within the Executive's draft programme for government. As members are aware, the draft programme for government includes 14 outcomes and over 40 indicators. These have been developed through the initial process of consultation and engagement with key stakeholders. Following consultation on the draft programme for government, which was held during the summer, we worked with our delivery partners to develop a delivery plan in support of 3 indicators for which we have responsibility. I will focus on my colleagues now on both indicator 23, which is about average journey time in key economic corridors, and indicator 25, the percentage of all journeys made by public transport, walking and cycling. And as the SRO for indicators 23 and 25, my focus today will be on those 2 indicators. As members are aware, while we contribute to the delivery of several of the PFG outcomes, our key contribution is to outcome 13, i.e. we connect people and opportunities to our infrastructure, and also to outcome 2, we live and work sustainably protecting the environment. The delivery plan sets out what we plan to do under each indicator, while recognising that indicators 23 and 25 are strongly interdependent. The success of our public transport system is dependent not just upon the availability and quality of buses and trains, but also on the quality and effectiveness of our road infrastructure. Similarly, the effectiveness of our road infrastructure, including in particular its ability to deal with traffic flows during the AM/PM peak, is highly dependent on the uptake of public transport and walking and cycling. And therefore, it's both and rather than either or between the 2 indicators. As the delivery plan makes clear, we must ensure that in planning the interventions which will support delivery of one indicator, we take account of what needs to be done in parallel to support delivery of the other. This requires joined up working, collaboration and engagement with our delivery partners, and continuing commitment from all involved if we are to be effective in delivering against the overall outcomes. This reflects the outcome-based accountability approach on which the overall programme for government is based. The programme for government makes it clear that many of the outcomes are generational in nature, and this is also the case for our indicators. For example, while many of the projects which we have detailed within the delivery plan will be complete within the PFG period, some of the major infrastructure projects can only be taken forward over 2 or more mandates. Clearly, how much we are able to deliver will be dependent on the capital and resources made available, and we're obviously all awaiting the outcome of the forthcoming budget processes. I'll say a little bit more about Indicator 23 now, Chair. This indicator reflects that in recent decades, due to welcome economic and demographic growth, there has been a significant increase in demand for travel. Combined with an increase in car ownership and the location of services and jobs in Belfast and in larger locations, settlements, this has led to increased pressure on our network. In turn, journey times and congestion have increased. We know that estimates of trip generation in Belfast as a result of currently planned developments suggest there would be an additional 10,000 journeys per hour during the peak hour. The road network is currently operating at capacity with limited opportunities to increase this. Therefore, we must all look to other solutions if we are to ensure that the resulting congestion and increased journey times do not constrain growth, prosperity and inclusion. As the delivery plan indicates, this will require continued investment in our road infrastructure, and a number of key projects are planned which will seek to address this. However, investing in the road infrastructure will not be sufficient. Research evidence tells that the effect of such investment is ultimately to increase demand to the point that the capacity of the network again becomes constrained. This is one of the key reasons why we need to make progress under Indicator 25 as well, and to be proactive in encouraging and facilitating the use of public transport, walking and cycling. We need to see genuine modal shifts away from the private car towards these forms of transport in the appropriate setting. Delivery plan sets out initial proposals to bring about this transformation. However, as our Minister has made clear, drawing on his experience recently in China, he wants to be even more radical and ambitious. The consultation process provides an opportunity to build on the current proposals and to work with others to look at how we can truly transform and use our transport infrastructure. In taking this forward at the heart of the delivery plan, at the end will be a simple message. For cycling, walking and public transport are viable options, it makes sense to promote them in the right setting for the right distance. The Minister wants to put in place a framework that will drive change and make that a reality. In particular, he wants to put even more emphasis on promoting walking than is currently reflected. He wants a framework that joins up policy, legislation and activities to promote a very clear message, encouraging not just government but communities and the business sector to transform how we travel and how we plan our urban centres to focus more on people and place. However, to achieve this will require a change of attitudes and behaviours. It will require a combination of investment in our public transport system and in our walking and cycling infrastructure, but it will also require incentives to encourage behavioural change. Ultimately, our aim is to reduce demand on the road network, reduce congestion and reduce travel times so as to generate and realise the wider economic, environmental and societal benefits for all of Northern Ireland. Our consultation process on the draft delivery plan will be taken forward in parallel with the consultation on the overarching programme for government, in which the Executive Office is leading. The consultation will take place over 8 weeks, ending on the 23rd of December. Over the weeks ahead, therefore, we will be holding a series of events throughout the North to outline our proposals and seek views and comments. We will be happy to provide details to the committee on those events, and obviously committee members will be very welcome to attend. We'll also be working closely with our key delivery partners to further develop and refine the plan. I would just finish finally by recording that the delivery plan is seen as a live document which will be subject to further change as new knowledge and information becomes available. With that, Chair, I'd wind up. I'm very happy to take any comments or questions.
Just before I take questions from the floor, Mr McGrath, the Minister's enthusiasm for walking, that's something I would share. I'm very keen on walking myself, but is this a departure from previous ministers had a keenness for cycling?
I think,
Or is it the view that both facilities can be used for both activities?
To paraphrase myself in 10 minutes, I think it's not either or, but both and. I think the Minister just thinks that when we talked about active travel and cycling, we have been not quite as active and proactive around promoting walking as the last leg of that, and I think he's asking us to do further work and explore possibilities around greater use of pedestrian areas in terms of how we plan our public places and that. So it's not instead of, the Minister's still very much committed to cycling, but he doesn't see that as the be all and the end all. And there will be people who may not want to use cars, but maybe don't cycle, can't cycle or whatever, but he's keen enough to say walking is another option.
Okay, thank you. Mrs Armstrong.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John, for your presentation. I just have a couple of questions on the delivery partners. I've noted, and I'll declare now as my previous interest in the Community Transport Association, I've noted that you included the Rural Community Transport Partnerships and Disability Action, but excluded bridge accessible transport in the Londonderry area. I'm just wondering, is there, or can that be changed, or can this be updated?
Oh yeah, it can't. Said, I mean, despite the amount of time and effort, there was still a bit of a rush to get things out at the end, and we've already made one change. We issued the first document. This actually didn't make any reference to Construction Employers Federation, simply to a lapse, nothing else, and that's been reflected, and we will update this. That was my point at the end of it being live. It's live in return to delivery partners, or it's not static, this, so we will pick that up happily.
And similarly, I noticed that Shop Mobility, that has been an incredible link between public transport and people being able to get around our towns and villages and cities and retail. You know, Shop Mobility have played such a key role in the past. Again, they're not here. I wondered maybe if it was the professional institutions that they were.
Well, I think sometimes there is catch-alls there, but we'll pick that up.
And thank you very much for highlighting the prioritising walking. To me, as a rural dweller and having a rural constituency, I'm going, this is wonderful. Are we going to get new footpaths out of this? Because unfortunately, in quite a lot of areas, walking is impossible because of the dangerous nature of rural roads and no street lighting. But I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity through the outcomes to consider something like that, so that not just urban and city dwellers can walk more, but encourage?
No, and that's true, and we had the same conversation with the Minister in recent days, that it might be seen promoting walking as an urban dimension, when in fact that's not the case. You do have different issues, but equally promoting walking on some busy country roads isn't actually as safe to do either, and whether it's footpaths or actually looking at alternatives to walking along main roads or something, it is something we want to look at, both in terms of the transport and the road safety dimension, which is never far from the Minister's heart either.
And it is also something, generally, as we all know, all of us in this room, how much footpaths could take a wee bit of tender loving care. I know that there has been a huge amount of investment, and I thank the Minister and the Executive for being able to get extra money into improving rural roads, but unfortunately some of our footpaths are left behind. And I know it's not all owned by Transport NI, it's councils and housing executive come into that too, but that joined up approach to improving footpaths would certainly make walking easier.
Well, certainly we will be looking at the issue of walking in rural areas and saying what alternatives are, because obviously money is limited, and in terms of footpaths, you've got to concentrate on the main areas and work our way through. But the Minister is, with his own background, sensitive to the issue that this can't be seen as an urban agenda in general.
Glad to. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr McNulty.
Thank you very much for your detailed presentation. And like Kelly, I'm from a rural constituency.
As indeed is a Minister, so it's not far away from his heart.
Yes, which is why it intrigues me, certain aspects of the document you just tabled. Walking is great. I've been campaigning for quite a number of months since before I was elected on improved services from Newry train station to from Newry train station, and I know the answer now. Walk. So I've engaged with the Minister on certain various levels to address the inequality of services in Newry train station, and the answer is now, maybe I'll go back to my constituency and say, walk.
That's not what we're saying. I mean, if there's issues, we will be, I'm sure you're making representation, and we will continue to look at them. We're not promoting walking because it's the only option in certain circumstances. We're promoting it for its own benefits.
Well, from a rural constituency, it doesn't really resonate for people who walking is not an option. And
I quite understand that, and that's why it's not about using it as an easy excuse in certain circumstances.
thank you.
I think, Mr. McGrath, you're referring to walking as a leisure pursuit as opposed to as something as a requirement or necessity for people to travel or transport.
No, but I think if you look within Belfast, there's large numbers of people who will walk in from the city as an alternative to catching public transport, and certainly as a better alternative to driving a car in single occupancy.
Okay, Mr. Easton.
Yeah, it's just a few issues. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned about walking and you mentioned the cycling. I don't think your cycling strategy is working. I'll give you an example of that so far. So, in Bangor along the dual carriageway, there was over £100,000 spent on creating a bicycle path along the footpath. And that's well over a year old and nobody ever uses it. So your strategy isn't working. So how are you going to, in this, get people on their bike?
Well, I think these issues are always difficult. If we don't provide facilities, then people will say, there's nowhere safe to cycle, and
But they're not using it.
there has to be an element. Well, I think sometimes there needs to be a longer term view. I mean, the infrastructure is to enable. People still need to be encouraged and have the desire themselves to do that. I mean,
it's the key thing. Pardon me, infrastructure is only part of the solution with it. But if the infrastructure is there, you can't support people, you can't promote cycling. So there needs to be a range of activities which come in behind that. I mean, there may be issues with particular pieces of infrastructure where further work may be required to make sure they're actually fully accessible. But the key thing here is having the infrastructure in place allows you to start to promote it as a viable option and then work with groups we've targeted, for example, children, commuters, etc., working through businesses to start promote use of that and to encourage people to develop the skills to allow them to cycle with confidence. What we find is that there are certain groups you cannot promote cycling to unless you have safe facilities in place for them to use it.
Okay. Well, it's a safe path. No, it's not been used. The next one is about park and ride. I support park and ride, but in particular in Bangor. All the park and ride is put in the centre and you want to expand this. You've basically taken away most of the parking spaces in the top of Main Street in Bangor, and all the shops are suffering because of it. And we've got an excessive park and ride facilities in Bangor, and one of them in particular isn't hardly used. So what are you taking into consideration with this, that you're not going to damage the local economy in Bangor any further than you've already done?
Well,
Not you personally, by the way.
Thank you. I don't shop enough for that. This is a difficult subject, and indeed the Assembly heard a lot of these issues indeed yesterday on it. I mean, I don't think we necessarily accept it because people can't bring their cars into urban centres, that automatically hits local commerce.
Oh, it has.
But it depends on whether you can trace cause and effect. I mean, if the car park and ride are full, then people are using it and going into the town.
No, they're not. They're going to Belfast for...
Well, that's where they choose to go. I wouldn't go. Well, I mean, I can't. I mean, Tom may want to add something.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's each park and ride site, obviously it's fairly unique. I think one of the major challenges in Bangor is actually being the ability to identify suitable sites on the rail line between Bangor and Belfast to service park and ride. What we're trying to do elsewhere is move to a model of park and ride which is outside the urban centres, preferably on a strategic network. The difficulty when you're dealing with rail, your historic rail network, your stations are within urban centres. So your park and ride to support those has to be within the urban centre itself. And that is one of the issues with rail. I think when you look at bus, what we're trying to do is develop park and ride at strategic interchanges on the road network itself that allows people travelling from rural areas to access those regional services. So it's a different model of park and ride. Okay. But certainly it's a point that can be taken on board in terms of looking at future development of park and ride, particularly in an area like Bangor.
No more in the centre, outside. Yeah. The last point is about increasing capacity. I see there's no plans for train halts either at the Belfast International or the George Best. Is that not a wee bit short-sighted? Because it's something that people are crying out for, because
I think
everybody
the-
has to go to those, has to go by car, basically.
I think the issue, if we look at Belfast International and Belfast City, previous research was underdone highlighted that in order to deliver a train service at a frequency and cost that could be attractive to users, you need to be dealing with roughly 10 million passengers accessing the airport per year. We're well below that. If we take Belfast International Airport, there is a commitment there to look at the potential for a rail halt once we start to get towards those levels of passenger numbers. The question is, could a rail service provide the same degree of access, regular frequency and speed of access into Belfast city centre that you can currently provide by bus, even if you do reach the 10 million? So it would be focusing on what are we trying to do here from the passenger experience rather than necessarily providing a train halt for the sake of providing a train halt. Belfast City Airport, I think we're dealing with passenger numbers in that, certainly I think it's around about 3 million, potentially at this stage. So there'll be a long way to go before you can make a train service to the airport economically viable, both from a government perspective and from a passenger perspective.
Yeah, but the difference with
question
the city is, I mean, George Best, is there's a train track right outside it. So-
Yeah, there's a track relatively close. You'll be required to remove the halt, but even if you remove the halt, would that provide a better service than you could provide through enhancing the bus-based public transport service? So we'll be looking at all the options and how we promote public transport access.
If you want passengers to grow, you need to provide the facilities, so that's what we think. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Palmer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the, I'll not say it was a comprehensive overview, but it was an overview. Firstly, I want to welcome the fact that there's been a major piece of work in terms of Moira and the park and ride there that is ready for, I suppose, delivery at some point in the near future, and also the Hilden halt, because there was a lot of safety improvements and enhancements they've had there recently. So I welcome that. I'm looking at the programme. We've developed the Derry Dublin rail service, and I just wonder at the Derry to Dublin rail service, when we have the Belfast to Dublin rail service that doesn't stop in Lisburn because of a time lapse, and it's to do with the Republic side in terms of connectivity. And I think that if you set the barriers too high, or sorry, if you set your barriers low, you're always going to achieve your outcomes. And I don't think you're setting the barrier high enough, or the bar high enough, in terms of delivery and output there, because we lost that service after it being introduced only a couple of years ago, simply because of a 2-minute timeline that you needed. Now, I know they've talked about the Belfast hub and that may improve the service, but you're looking to promote the Gold Line services on the A6, the A5, the M1 and the A4, and that's wonderful. And the Minister announced just recently that he's hoping to put the bus line from Sprucefield to Belfast. But I mean, that still creates a massive blockage in terms of the time travel and the corridor travelled. Doesn't matter where you have the extra bus lane on, it's still going to create a massive backlog into the city centre, simply because we haven't dealt with the York Street interchange. I just wonder what your views are on the priorities in terms of delivering the York Street interchange improvements.
Well, I mean, the issues on York Street interchange have been rehearsed at length in recent times. It's an issue. I think the Minister regards it as an important scheme, but he already has 4 flagship projects of the Executive to take forward, and it's a matter of how much headroom there is, and then the Brexit decision means the likelihood of European funding for York Street and indeed other projects has receded, and that just means, I mean, it's an affordability issue around York Street. It's not an issue that doesn't involve the merits of the scheme.
Well,
And indeed, you know, once you go beyond York Street, there's a number of other schemes that people would hold, and you know, it's important. I mean, it's where you cut your cloth, and the Executive has already decided it was flagship projects or her flagship projects.
And I suppose in terms of, yes, I recognise that, you know, the North West and the Minister's priorities are geared to the North West, and rightly so, you know, where there needs to be improvements. But the A5 is an all-singing, all-dancing corridor that is bypassing bypasses and roundabouts that have been, you know, established over time, and there are JRs on it, there are land vesting orders on it. There's a multitude of hiccups along the route, if you like. in terms of getting to the outcome. And it's £880 million is proposed to spend on that A5, and I'm not sure what it would take for the York Street interchange with 100,000 commuters in it as compared to 20,000 on the A5.
And that's
The argument, I think, is, prioritise where the priority is needed. And, I can't see for the life of me how on earth you can't. I'm not asking that you don't deliver the A5, but I'm saying, do you need this all gold-plated one?
Mark, I think it's fair to say I might be in absolute agreement with what you're making, but that's a political decision, to be fair. These are civil servants who are not in a position to answer that question.
I
Well,
was about to say that, George, thank you.
yes, well, and I take your point, Chair. I'm just making the point that I think, that sometimes our priorities are definitely need to be reprioritised, and if that's a political decision, it's a political decision, but it's really, Belfast comes to a standstill, and we need to get around that if we can.
Okay, is that you? I just on that point, Mr. McGrath, in relation to the committee will be the guest of Translink tomorrow. We'll get a briefing on the Belfast Transportation Hub, which we're looking forward to. So we've got the Belfast Transportation Hub, we've got the new Transportation Hub in Londonderry with the old railway station being brought to you, which are very much welcome. So transport obviously is something which is very much to the forefront of the Minister and the Executive's minds, and I welcome that entirely, because there has obviously been over the years a lack of investment in infrastructure for reasons of a security nature. But can I just say, in relation to the point you've just made in relation to York Street interchange, which I have raised in the Chamber and expressed concern about the Minister's recent statements, which he did seem to shift, to be fair, can I just, okay, you're making the point, and you've made the point well, in relation to Brexit and the fact that there may be pressures because of monies not coming from Europe. But in that context, is there preparation being done in the fact that if we're not having money coming from Europe, we're also not sending money to Europe, and there will be monies inside the United Kingdom? Are we having conversations with the national government at Westminster around those monies being used for that particular project, for example?
Well, it's probably beyond my pay grade, but in the first thing, there'll only be, the money we won't be sending to Europe will only kick in post-Brexit.
Yes.
And obviously, that'll be determined by the Treasury and the Chancellor.
Yes.
Obviously, the ministers are awaiting the outcome of the autumn statement now for the next foreseeable period. But that, the extent to which that factors in funding which would have otherwise have gone to Brussels post 2019 or whatever, I don't know. And obviously,
You get the point I'm making. At some point,
no, I entirely understand
at some
that.
point there will be a cessation of money coming from Europe. There's also then at that same point a cessation of money going to Europe.
I think it's fair to say, yes, if that then means that the capital block for the executive is enhanced as a result of that,
Yes.
we would clearly, I mean, we are the largest consumer of capital within the Northern Ireland block at the minute, could happily spend twice that much for going through the schemes.
Okay.
And I know my minister would be arguing his case robustly.
But can I just say, there's a Brexit unit, I understand, set up within the department. Is that right?
Sorry?
Is there a Brexit unit set up within the...
There's a small, perfectly formed Brexit unit.
A small what?
Perfectly formed.
Perfectly
small,
formed.
but two or
Well,
three.
in its perfectly formed deliberations.
We have two or three people who are, in addition to their day job, are trying to
Right,
address
okay.
the Brexit implications. We've also, because we've been quite successful in EU funding of all Northern Ireland departments,
Yes.
we'll be doing some work on that, on both what are the implications of Brexit and also what opportunities still remain pre-Brexit.
Okay. Can I just say, from this committee's point of view, that, when we met as a committee to look at what our key aims and objectives were, the York Street interchange was one of those. Mm-hmm. And what I would say is that any potential threat that there might be is something which we as a committee would like to see the Brexit unit, small though it is, when it's involved in its deliberations and its planning and its preparations and its strategising in terms of how we deal with the post-Brexit situation, in terms of how we fund these major infrastructural projects for Northern Ireland, that's something we would like to see them looking at and would be potentially top of the list.
Right, I'm just very happy with that, Chair. Just at the moment, the work we do around Brexit is trying to assess what are the implications that will arise for Brexit,
Sure.
feeding into work led at the centre to
Yeah.
inform the executive's position going into negotiations. The funding thing is a bit beyond that at the minute. It really is. What will this mean for us
Yeah.
across the piece, from regulatory rules we have, travel rules, issues around DVN. I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff.
And I'm hugely sympathetic, and I'm trying not to be unfair. I hope you don't think I'm being unfair, because I know that you have to wait until it comes down on high from London in terms of, as the other devolved administrations do as well, as indeed do government departments, I guess, in London as well, to hear what their deal is from the Treasury. But I'm just simply making the point that there's been a lot of hyperbole around a lot of this issue about Brexit. But remember, people need to understand, as well as money not coming from Europe, there will be money not going to Europe. So there are certainly threats, but there are also opportunities in terms of our own tax-raising monies and how that's distributed within the kingdom. Mr. McCann?
Sure, just a couple of things, and I think just a point to make on one of the things that Danny had said, you know, what people are trying to do with the A5 is address the inequalities that existed for years and years, and offered some sort of infrastructural travel arrangements in the West. There's one who has to suffer the West Link. I live in the pollution that comes from it, and there are many people that live beside it. See the difficulties that have been raised there. Okay, I get it, that people have to travel from our constituencies to our constituencies to get from A to B. So there are people that have
we need to get through the chair now.
No, but I understand.
I
that,
understand your
but there was
frustrations.
There was a number of points made.
Yep.
Back to what I was going to say. I noticed in 1.26 it gave a breakdown of 25% of all journeys were made by walking, cycling, or public transport, compared to 22% in 2014 and 24% 10 years ago. How do you establish that?
Sorry?
How do you establish that?
It's through a travel survey that's undertaken every year. So there's a sample of households that are surveyed, and the responses then are all collated and analysed. And it's as a percent of all journeys. So the different modes would include walking, cycling, public transport, and that's broken down then by rail, by Ulster Bus and Metro, black taxi. So all of those figures are collected together, and then they're totaled to then your percentage of all journeys that are by walking, cycling and public transport. So walking would be about 18 or 19% within that, 1% cycling, and the rest is the public transport element.
Thank you. No, I was just wondering how you that was.
We can happily get one of our statisticians to come and give you a detailed briefing on it, Fra.
That's okay, John. No, but I do think, and certainly I constantly see the upgrading and updating and the provision of cycle lanes throughout Belfast, and I understand what Alex has said, and we have this long-standing joke about Bangor, you know, but because people don't see it being used at present, not only does it say there's a problem, but it's a problem not only to do with the department who provide the statistics and certainly the thing, but it's a problem with communication. And I think what we need to do is to work within schools, work within others to say that this is available. And I think what we need to do is to change the culture. We all have a part to play in that. Okay, sir.
Okay, Mr. McCann?
No. Soapbox is over for the day.
It might not be, because Mrs. Palmer has signalled that
Thank you, Chair.
you're the chair, Mrs. Palmer.
Yes, indeed, Chair, and I do thank my friend, Mr. McCann there, in terms of his comments. And, you know, it's not about, Chair, it's not me inferring that the West doesn't need infrastructure. It's what I'm saying is, this is a gold-plated design. This is a gold-plated structural design that bypasses and roundabouts that have been recently constructed to help to try to alleviate the stresses on that road. And it's not about that. I mean, the A5 is the A5, and, you know, where does it go strategically? And the travel...
I'll call you back in to ask a question.
Yes, okay, Chair. So I suppose, in trying to put that to bed, Chair, but my question is around your question, Chair, and Brexit and the implications for breakfast or the benefits of Brexit. And You could flip that on its head, Chair, and you could also say that, there is funding that is needed or required for the A5 to be delivered from the Republic of Ireland. So, do we freeze that the way we're freezing the York Street interchange in order to establish whether or not we can deliver the gold-plated A5 if there is no monies from the Republic of Ireland? So I'm just saying that there are issues there that I think the Minister should address.
Right, so there's no question, actually.
Oh, what?
But it is a question. Right. To be
Could I
fair,
just-
question that the civil service can't answer.
Well, can I just clarify, there wasn't a freeze in York Street. There wasn't a set timetable for York Street in the first place because of lack of funding. So there was no decision to put it on hold. It was in the same position it has been in.
It's not what's in the press.
Mr. Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, John and your team for the presentation. My question would be around the rail line from Londonderry to Coleraine. A lot of work has been done on it recently. A lot of money has been spent on it. I'll just be as brief as possible. The Shackleton site that was sold fairly recently by the executive to a private developer, and with the possibility, well, it's not a possibility, it's actually should be on stream maybe in a couple of years' time or year and a half's time, the new DARD headquarters, Ballykilly, the possibility of stop-off point.
A halt?
Halt.
Well, I know there's been some conjecture about that. I'm not sure there's any plans at the minute for that, but obviously depending on the amount of demand in the future. I mean, the Minister's committed to improving services on that line. The current works will be finished towards the end of the year, and that marks a substantial investment, over £40 million, to good effect.
Yeah.
Obviously, and one of the issues he said he wants to look at is the provision of an hourly service there, which will have a cost to it, and he needs to see that in a budget constraint. Obviously, depending on usage in the future, a halt in that area could be a possibility, but all these things require significant funding, and capital funding on railways is necessary, but it would be something that I couldn't rule it out.
No. Just, Chair, that with the site being opened up, and lots of people using the facility, and from all sorts of point of view, that a halt there would be very advantageous, I'm sure. Particularly the new developments will be taking place in the near future.
Well, obviously, if there's significant urban development and there would be demand, it would be something, at least a case could be made for it. But sometimes, in the same way as Tom made the point about the international airport, sometimes just the economics of these things don't stack up. So obviously, it would depend on a convincing business case being made at the time.
Yes. But keep it in mind.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, Mrs. Armstrong.
Just very quickly, Chair, you reminded me when you were speaking about the potential money that we might realise out of Europe, but that's something else. Recently, the Minister has been in China, and
Yep.
I know he's had quite good conversations with different provinces and different officials with regards to potential investment. I was just wondering, there's no mention of any additional funding in this document that we've received. I'm just wondering if there has been any deliberations in the department about any potential outcomes of his visit.
Well, the Minister went his initial visit to explore and build relationships. He regarded it as a very worthwhile trip. He's established a number of connections which he wants to pursue. But I think in this sort of arena, you don't go and do quick deals. You build relationships and engagement and get mutual understanding, and something might come out. So it would be far too early to be factoring in potential. And I mean, the Chinese, will be investing. They will not be. It's not government money, it would be investors' money. They will be looking for the appropriate proposition that will give a return. But it's something the Minister is very keen on. He regards a successful trip. Indeed, my dad Tom was with the Minister on it, and making introductions and getting an opening that he will pursue, and something he will want to, because he is conscious that there will not be sufficient public funding to do all the things that he and the executive would like to do. So whatever angles you can get on these things,
he is keen to explore. I've said that on a number of occasions recently.
I'm back on Saturday from the Assembly and the Business Trust trip to China, where they showed us the Wuhan transport planning model, which is to be seen to be believed. As you can imagine, I was very excited. There are potential there, and they. Right, well, but the good thing is that they were so impressed with Minister Hazard that there was very good vibes coming back that there would be investment.
Yep.
Perhaps, Chair, we could ask for an update from the Minister following his visit, because it seems to have been quite impressive on the Chinese.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very positive visit, but as John said, it was about starting to build the relationship, and it's not unlike the experience in building a relationship with Europe. We became very successful in securing European funding, but behind that was about 2 to 3 years' work, building the relationship, getting Europe interested in here as a region to understand the importance of the projects. So it's quite a long-term process of building a relationship and an understanding both of the area and the opportunities that are within it.
Okay, there are no other members. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm late. I had another meeting at 2 o'clock, but
Okay.
because of constituency relevance, I couldn't really
Okay, no
miss. And if this point has been brought up before, I apologise. You'll tell me immediately, but I'd be delighted if it's been brought up before and surprised. I went through the documentation that we had sort of last night. I found very little reference to plans to expand our rail network. More emphasis on rail when we're talking about transport in general. For example, there's no reference to the suggestions made by the Into the West rail lobby, of which I'm the convener, and I have been for a number of years, that when we're building the A5, that we ought to build, or at least leave, the infrastructure there of a bed to run a railway alongside it. You can see that in Germany. I've been on roads where the train is running down the middle of the road, and if I may, and it saves an awful lot. It means sort of that it's there for the future. If you don't put that in now, we'll never get a train running again from Derry to Dublin. Why hasn't more consideration been given to that? Why is it that there are frequent references here to the environment? And the need to cut down on CO2 emissions. That's then followed by talk about this road and that road. And when we build roads, we suck more cars onto the roads. That's what happens when we build roads. When people say, oh, you know, our projections are such and such. You build the road and your projections will be right. But if you build railways instead, if you expand, we devote less money, relatively speaking, to public transport and to rail in this part of the United Kingdom than anywhere else by a big margin. Why is that? And why is that not being addressed when we talk about government plans for the future?
Well, I think, pick up the last point. I mean, I think, and I made the point in my opening remarks, it's not roads versus public transport. You need both. You know, buses, whatever, need to travel on good public roads. So when some of the figures about the balancing the two are quoted, we don't necessarily accept that there's a wrong imbalance. We would like more money for both. I think in terms of expanding the rail network, a balance has to be struck. I mean, you're talking about significant funds, and whether, just as earlier we made a point, it's difficult to sustain the economic case for a rail link to the international airport. A rail link into the West, to use the expression, I think the economics of that would be fairly challenging. The economics, let alone finding the money to do it. I think generally, Tom, we have a real utilisation strategy which talks about some possibilities to be explored, and there's some possibilities mentioned in the document, but you're talking about sizeable funds, and I think, notwithstanding what happened in Germany, building railway lines running along parallel to roads might perhaps be a luxury we can't afford here.
I think maybe I didn't express my point, but what I'm talking about is not actually having a working railway running alongside the roads at the minute. I think that when you're, for example,
You're laying the groundwork for it.
you're laying the groundwork for it, and you wouldn't have to vest land in the future for it and so forth. And it's actually economical, both in terms sort of the amount of land that you're taking. It's actually, it doesn't, rail lines are not like roads. You don't need, you know, 100-yard wide swathe of the countryside in order to build a dual carriageway in the middle of it. Railway lines sort of are quite narrow things. And an awful lot of it, you say about the West, the track bed already exists. For a lot of the area, you go through Barnesmore Gap and down to Donegal, you can see it. You can walk along the lane. We call it that in Derry. I mean, you do it on a Sunday, you see loads of people walking out the lane. It's the railway lane, and it's there. It's there. I mean, so there should be more investigation, it seems to me, of what would the cost be. But would the cost be for reinstating rail and expanding rail, particularly given the effect that this have? One there's freight mentioned in here. About Midway Train. There is not 1 ounce of anything moved in Northern Ireland by freight train. Nothing. That's ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. One freight train will take 40 large trucks off the road. That in itself is a consideration. In what way are environmental considerations factored in to the discussions and the debate and the decision making in relation to transport infrastructure?
There's a couple of points there it might be worth picking up on. On the freight one to start with, we did explore when we were doing the rail prioritisation strategy was the opportunity to get freight back on the rail network in Northern Ireland. But one of the big problems is everyone we've talked to in Europe, whether it's on the island of Ireland, the distances and the type of goods being moved just aren't suitable for freight or for rail. There's no demand there for it. What we did say within the strategy, it's something we'll continue to explore. If there's interest in moving freight and rail, we'll look at how we can accommodate that. We did look within the strategy on the potential to expand the rail network into the west, down into the south. Now, the issue with that would require about 5 miles of rail investment in the north to do that. It pushes the entire bill effectively onto the south, and at this stage there's no demand to do it. The population is not seen as being there to allow it to be feasible. In the north, we did look at opportunities. We explored all the suggestions were put forward in terms of expanding the rail network. And the conclusion we came to that was the big challenge we have is the population density, getting the critical mass that makes rail viable. And if we take the old style of rail network, where we get onto every major town or village in the west, it just wouldn't work. You simply wouldn't be able to provide a service at a cost or the time to take people that could compete with road. And we can see that to a degree in the enterprise service, where we're competing with the road, and there's a need now to look at upgrading the enterprise to reduce the journey time. What we did say within that is there are opportunities for effectively short rail extensions. And in the delivery plan we set out proposals to do feasibility studies to guide longer term. And they pick up that model in effect of building the railway line along the road network. So you take it to a strategic interchange point. I think we've identified Dungannon, Stoke Armagh and Castle Dawson north of Loughney as key points where you've got good access. You have a lot of people accessing the road network at those points to make the journey on to Belfast. So there's a commitment in there to look at feasibility studies for those extensions. Beyond that, the average rail extension if we're dealing with relatively flat ground, minimal amount of bridges, we're looking, I think, is around about £11 million per kilometre, which doesn't sound much, but actually is when you start to factor in the distances. Then it's the operating cost of the system itself. None of it can be done before we have the existing network. Projects such as dualling of the Dargan Bridge, those are big constraints at this minute in time and significantly expanding new rail services. And unless we address those first, any rail extension we put on, we couldn't actually put on more services, significantly more services overall coming onto your access in Belfast, so you wouldn't have significant impact. If all the investment was delivered, if we put extensions in place, we would still effectively only be looking at around about 2 to 3% of the population using rail. That's the maximum capacity you could deliver on the network without much further investment. That would be at a cost of 60 million per year required just to maintain the network, and at least another 40 to 60 million a year to do the development work long term. So it would be a big drain on the department's capital budget. Alongside that, you're trying to take forward a road campaign or a road building programme, which is ultimately about addressing the historic underinvestment in the network, a major backlog there to be addressed. You're right in terms of if you build roads, and you build roads in isolation, all that happens is more people come onto those roads until you end up right back at the point you were at the start in terms of congestion. So what we do say in the delivery plan is you cannot build the roads without putting the public transport measures in place and without looking at how we influence travel behaviours on the network to get much more people onto public transport. And it would be the same issue with the York Street interchange. Even if you deliver that and you make it easier for people to travel, you would still need to have more people on public transport for that to operate effectively.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Just not delay you more than another 90 seconds, just to say this, that in relation to freight traffic and so on, there is sort of from Westport to Rosslare, that meant there's now freight traffic going, and people said when that was launched, they said I can produce the cuttings for you from local concerts and so on. This will never work. I mean, so there just isn't the volume there. It is working. It is working and will continue to work. And as I say, sort of the environmental benefits of that seem to me to outweigh anything else if that was applied more generally. But I think what's needed here, and it's not your fault or you're within your remit, what's needed here, as I said, just to voice it once, is a major decision in terms of policy, a policy decision for the future that's going to say that we are going to shift the emphasis dramatically towards public transport and towards rail. And on environmental grounds, we all the time with people jumping up and down and talking about global warming, we must do all about it. Then they come to make plans for transport and nothing is done about it. That's the point that I'm making.
Okay, look, thank you very much indeed for, I do hope, Mr McGrath, for someone who doesn't shop, that as we come up to Christmas you will be shopping and you'll be shopping in Belfast to support a local economy.
This was very good.
I normally do, Chair.
I drive my car and I'll not be there.
The other big revelation of that session was that Mr McCann, Eamon McCann is the man in black and he walks the line, so there you are.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Call for him to sing.
We'll wait till closer to Christmas.
That line was in a prison.
You play guitar, Eamon?
And the well.
And the way Johnny was Johnny Cash.
Daddy told me about it.
Walk the line.
Okay, members, our next presentation then is from Fiona McCandless, Deputy Secretary to the Department, Linda McHugh, Director of Water and Drainage Policy, and Damien Curran, Head of Stakeholder Unit. So you're all very welcome. And I take it you'll be making a presentation which will be answered, and then members will have questions. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to come and have a talk to you today in relation to particularly the water indicator that's in the draft programme for government consultation document. I'm joined today by Linda, who is the Director of Water and Drainage Policy Division, and by Damien, the Head of the Shareholder Unit, which manages our relationship with Northern Ireland Water. The water indicator, which is a reflection of the overall performance assessment of NI Water, it's a new addition to the programme for government outcome. And the outcome is we connect people and opportunities through our infrastructure, as John has already referenced. It was included following the initial consultation responses because they indicated that they wished for a strengthening of the position in relation to water. It recognised that water and wastewater infrastructure is an enabler of growth. It requires long-term planning and investment to meet both the needs of the current and future society. You'll have heard from Northern Ireland Water recently that there are growing demands to expand the wastewater and water infrastructure to maintain security of supply, keep pace with economic growth, to meet environmental standards and to reduce instances of sewer spills and flooding. There are also a number of capacity issues, and we must ensure that we are able to accommodate new development, whatever type that of development is, whether it's housing, industry, tourism, to make sure that that's not impeded by our undercapacity in either wastewater or water infrastructure. We all depend on clean, safe drinking water and effective sanitation, and they're fundamental needs to healthy society. Water is also a very valuable resource, and we need to make sure that we use it sustainably. So whilst this indicator forms part of the connectivity outcome, how our water and our wastewater is managed also contributes to a number of the other outcomes in the programme for government consultation document, whether it's relating to growth, health and environmental sustainability. The inclusion of water in the programme for government underlines the role of this important natural resource in supporting DFI to deliver wider executive objectives. John mentioned earlier a partnership approach. The outcomes-based approach set out in Programme for Government recognises the importance of partnership, and in order to achieve that and our outcome, we need to gain the commitment of our key partners to work with them in a flexible and an energetic way. And clearly, Northern Ireland Water has the lead role to play in the delivery of this outcome. We also need to recognise the strength and expertise of other partners, such as the utility regulator, and we're very keen to make best use of our limited resources. So we tend to engage and communicate and cooperate with our partners and continue that as we develop the delivery plan for the water outcome. Stakeholder engagement is also very important. The involvement of stakeholders in every stage of development and delivery is essential to the spirit of the outcomes-based approach. It's about collective planning and implementation. John mentioned earlier we intend to run a series of consultation events during the 8-week consultation programme for our period for PFG, and we're going to run a series of events throughout the North and also involve a number of sectoral events. And we'll obviously be advising the committee of the dates of that, and we welcome your engagement as these are finalised. The delivery framework itself, during the initial consultation and PFG response, suggested that there was more work needed to be done to demonstrate the link between the outcomes and the indicators. Therefore, the recent consultation document sets out that relationship more clearly and sets out the data that will be used to measure progress in an open and transparent way. And that's what we've tried to do in the identification of the water measurement. It's important to note that the delivery plan for water, as it's a new outcome in the new draft consultation, it's under development. And in any event, the outcomes-based approach requires that all these plans will be defined and developed during the consultation period and informed by the stakeholder engagement. In order to really give you some more detail on the overall performance assessment and that measurement, I'll just pass over to Linda now, who's going to provide you some detail.
Okay. Well, as you will know, the Protect for Government approach has been to identify a small number of indicators that will be used to gauge progress towards achieving each outcome. And given the breadth of Northern Water's work, the first challenge was to find a single measure that would reflect progress in terms of Northern Water's role in supporting economic growth. Northern Water is a highly regulated company with a long list of key performance indicators that are monitored and evaluated by both the company itself, but also other stakeholders such as the utility regulator, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, the Northern Environment Agency and the Consumer Council. However, pulling one single indicator from that long list of key performance indicators would have failed to represent the range of Northern Water's work. So we work closely with the utility regulator, the Executive Office, NISRA and of course Northern Water itself to determine the best approach to take to find a measure that would reflect their performance. And the challenge, I suppose, was to find something that covered significant areas of Northern Water's operations, something that could be measured and verified, and something that, above all, was meaningful to a wide audience. So what we're proposing to include is the Overall Performance Assessment, or OPA for short. Now, the OPA is an overall performance assessment system that is used by the utility regulator here in the North to monitor the level of service that Northern Water provides to its customers. But the model was originally developed by Ofwat to compare the customer service performance of companies in England and Wales. So it's a tried and tested model, and the model used here mirrors Ofwat's model to a large extent, so that direct comparisons can be made between the performance of Northern Water and other water companies in GB. The OPA takes raw data on water and sewage services, customer service and environmental compliance, and scores the company based on its performance over 11 separate elements. And those elements are risk of low water pressure, unplanned interruptions in drinking water supply, hose pipe restrictions, customer contact, how effective that is, drinking water quality, sewage sludge disposal, leakage assessment, water pollution incidents, 2 different separate levels of sewage pollution incidents, and finally sewage treatment works compliance. Those measures are marked out of 50 each, and then they're weighted to give the final overall OPA score. And we've provided in the consultation document and the delivery plan a table of the measures and the scores that are attached to those. The maximum possible score overall is 304. And through the price control process, the regulator sets an annual OPA target for Northern Water to meet. And over the lifetime of the current control period, the target rises from 211 in 2015-16 to 231 in 2020-2021. And just to give you some idea of the improvement in Northern Water's performance since it was established in 2007, in the 2007-8 financial year, it was sitting at 98, so less than half of where it is now. The OPA then provides a single measure to gauge progress over a range of activities, but it has additional benefits as well. It's recognised industry-wide, and it's a model against which Northern Water can be benchmarked. It's already used to monitor Northern Water's performance, and its achievement against target is published annually in the Utility Regulator's Annual Cost and Performance Report. It provides, therefore, a robust third-party analysis of Northern Ireland Water's role and the role of the regulator in monitoring performance. So the regulator, it will be there endorsing and making a third-party judgment on Northern Water's performance. And it won't result in additional data collection or further analysis outside the already well-defined performance reporting structure that already exists. And finally, there's a strong historic data and a baseline from which to start. That said, we also understand that it's not completely perfect. So, for example, a disastrous performance in one element of those 11 could result in a downturn in the overall performance, even though the other 10 are very good. And neither does it absolutely fully reflect the breadth of Northern Water's operations. However, both the Department, the Minister, the regulator and Northern Water all agree that it's preferable to the alternative, which is to focus on one very narrow aspect of the company's performance. At the outset, Fiona also said that Northern Water had an important contribution to make in achieving a number of other outcomes in the programme for government. And it will have a specific role to play in outcome number 2, which is we live and work sustainably, protecting the environment. And this cross-fertilisation is an important aspect of the programme for government, and we'll be working, we have worked with and will be continuing to work closely with DAERA to ensure that our respective outcomes work in synergy. So at that point, we're happy to take any questions you have on the water indicator.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Mr. Garvin.
Thank you very much indeed. And I do have to put on record, congratulations to Northern Ireland Water for the improvement in the performance, and also the commitment to make £900 million spend in infrastructure between now and 2020-21. But that's where I come back to what I have to say now is we're talking about a joined up approach and looking how we deal with stuff. We produce and deliver drinking water quality to every home. That water is used for all sorts of purposes, including water in their garden, washing their car, and not always for drinking quality water. I think that we need to actually start to think outside the box. Have you had any consultation with the Department of Finance in relation to what could be reduce the amount of water we're actually putting into the system because we create rain harvesting programs which work in every other country in the world, where they use that water for washing machines, toilet flushing. You bring 2 water lines into the house, one for pumped clean water for drinking and the other for those sorts of what I call non-health risk applications. Has there been any work? Plus, you're reducing the amount of water, because most of our water that goes down our drain is put into a drainage system which is separated until it reaches the main road, and then it becomes combined.
Yeah.
Has there been any, and we're wasting a lot of money reprocessing that because it adds to our waste going into our sewage treatment works, and then we spend a fortune cleaning water to actually water people's gardens, wash their cars with it, wash their windows, do all sorts of things that they don't need to use drinking quality water. Has there been any indication that you can use this as a carrot for building regulations to change to actually include that? Because it's something which maybe retrofitting is difficult, but for all new developments that go forward, it could be very easily to make a regulation that they do it and they must provide it.
Yeah.
And I know every development that I've been involved in, because we hear about SUDs and floods that are caused in certain areas, and they put in these SUD programs, they're storing water to stop it going into the rivers. Why are we not actually saying, if that water is held on site to be released into a river at a time whenever it's not going to flood the area, can we not look at ways of ensuring that we use that water back in for those types of programmes? Because those are new developments that are coming on that are having to be put in SUD programmes, some of which are having capacity of 500,000 litres.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, your point's very well made, and we've been doing a lot of work, both as a department and with partners through the Stormwater Management Group, to look at ways that we can either legislate for or actively encourage better use of water in the environment. And, you know, you mentioned sustainable drainage systems, SUDs. You know, we have changed the legislation so that Northern Ireland Water can adopt hard SUDs, and that's fine. But actually, what you're talking about is probably the next step and a bigger prize, because that's a more environmentally friendly long-term solution. Because the water doesn't, as you say, go into the drains, so you're not having to pump it up and down and through a wastewater treatment works when it doesn't have to be treated. And also, if you put stormwater down a drain or a sewer, and that gets overwhelmed, then you get out of sewer flooding, which is the most unpleasant thing.
Well aware of it.
You know, you're quite right. We need to actually think more creatively about how we use water. And I mean, I'm not trying to pass the buck, but I think the onus is on architects and developers to think, you know, can we actually use our water better?
Architects and developers will get away with the minimum that they have to do. For argument's sake, unless we put in that they must insulate buildings to a certain standard, they will not design buildings that have that type of insulation. I'm saying this is what we have to do, and there should be penalties if you do not comply with it. So on the basis of that, use building control as a reason to do it. And what's the restriction of that? Because it means an engagement with DFP to ensure that it is part of their programme to actually put it forward as a change to regs.
Yeah, because building control policy rests at the moment with DOF, so you know, that is an issue. We do have somebody representing building control on the Stormwater Management Group, and so we're looking at ways to encourage more thinking to be done. And I mean, the other thing that we did actually...
You're not going to encourage it unless you actually make
Well,
it.
one thing we did through the Water and Sewerage Services Act 2016 was that up until then, Northern Water had to... They didn't have any way of refusing surface water connection to a new development. Now they can, if, in their view, the developer hasn't given enough consideration to alternative sustainable drainage systems.
But that's why our systems are in the mess they're in today, because they didn't care about trying to actually control the amount of water they put into it. So the downpipes from that was draining clean water off a roof, down a downpipe was going into contaminated water for sewage, and as a consequence, it becomes contaminated water ultimately and has to be treated. So I'm saying, you know, it's not rocket science. We could save in the overall expenditure from the department in relation to cleaning water that doesn't need to be cleaned.
I think it's also important to say, Chair, that it's clearly a very important natural resource, and we need to make sure that we use all elements of it sustainably. The department also has responsibility for planning policy, whilst it doesn't have responsibility for building control, but it does have responsibility for planning policy. And for planning policy, for many years, what we've tried to do is encourage developers to act in a more sustainable way, whilst not a legislative requirement for them to do so, and to adopt SUDs, but on a voluntary basis. But we've done a bit of work with the architects, and we've done work with local government as well, to try and who have responsibility for planning now, in terms of the implementation of the policy, to try and make sure that local government also are aware of the impacts of not operating in a sustainable way, and to try and encourage SUDs as best possible.
Okay. Mrs. Armstrong?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I know that you've said that what's presented in front of us doesn't look to all areas of Northern Ireland Water's business. That has me a little concerned, and then you mentioned about outcome 2 and working with DAERA, and the reason why I mention it is because I'm being inundated at the moment, and it's been going on since the election, with, as you can imagine, with money picking up now. A few developers are going back to areas where they've started to build houses and now they're adding to those. But the issue comes back to Northern Ireland Water, where the developers are now seeking to have sign-off on their developments. But what we're actually finding is that there's farmers' land being absolutely polluted and destroyed by runoff that's not being fed into the sewage system. So when you talk about the rural wastewater programme, is that actually going to have some fundamental impact on Northern Ireland Water to say, actually, you need to look closely at the impact? There may be a development that has been going on for a number of years. Are they looking to ensure that the connections are all there, so that runoff from gardens and roofs aren't killing agricultural land, poisoning agricultural land and flooding agricultural land? Where's the building at? Is it the Consumer Council? Because in the past when I've contacted the Consumer Council, it's not part of their remit.
This is where it gets slightly complicated, because that agricultural, or that runoff that you're talking about, if it doesn't go down a drain, it's not Northern Water's issue, it's Rivers Agencies. And actually Rivers Agency have a role in signing off on developments too. Now, this is where I think, now that we're all part of one department, we need to look across everything and try to get a better join in what we are doing as a department. Because in previous times, Rivers, they were interested in making sure that a new development didn't cause additional urban runoff that would go into a river and flood the river. Equally, Northern Water was concerned that the new sewage system would not overwhelm their system and cause out of sewer flooding. And those are both very laudable. But now we actually need to look across and join things up in a better way. And I think there's a huge piece of policy development work to do within the new department.
It would be appreciated, because Rivers have said, it's not my job, and Northern Ireland Water are going, it's not my job. Actually, it is somebody's job, because while the toilets are all connected, the runoff isn't, and it should be, and it is part of the requirements of that development before it's signed off. And what I'm finding the difficulty is nobody's taking responsibility for this, and we're left with agricultural land being poisoned.
Yeah, and the issue about surface water management is very, very difficult. The European Commission held a 2-day workshop on pluvial flood risk management, and there is not one part of Europe that has this absolutely sussed, because particularly when we've got climate change and we've got heavier convection rains, and it's at that point when if heavy rain falls on a tarmacked area or a roofed area, and consideration hasn't been given to how you manage that, it will just run straight off. And I mean, there's lots of innovative things you can do. Invariably, it costs more money, and that's where you get developers saying, "Well, we can't afford to put systems like that in." But I think that there's a sort of a hearts and minds piece here as well. We as consumers need to think, what sort of a place do we want to live in, and maybe we do need to spend a bit more money to actually save money in the long run.
I think perhaps what I'm finding quite difficult is those developers are saying we can't afford. They built the houses and they didn't consider their sewage properly, and now they're begging Northern Ireland Water to sign off the development and leaving farmers to fit the bill for not being able to use land and to clean up. It would be good to actually see in this, some sort of forward work plan about how that legislative process could perhaps be taken forward, because it is becoming more and more difficult as we see developers coming back to zones that they had started to build and now they're finishing off, where this is an ongoing issue and a growing issue across Northern Ireland.
Okay,
Mr. Framacan.
Sure, and I just wanted to pick up on Kelly's point, because I do believe that in the past, the only time when the developers moved in anything is that if you put them under pressure to do it, or you legislated for it. If not, then they will take all the shortcuts they can, to not spend any additional money or resources. And to go back to Paul's point, I thought it was actually a very interesting point, and I know that in other countries they go all out to store rainwater because there's a shortage of water in those countries. So it would be interesting to try to find out if there are countries who have done this. Let's see how we can think it. Certainly,
I saw a great example in Berlin recently where. In an area where the Berlin Wall used to run straight through it, so they had the advantage of starting on brownfield site, and there was a massive development, but designed into that was this huge lake, which was essentially on top of land that was the roof of a train line and a car park and a road. So they used that hard surface top to collect rainwater. They then pumped that up through the buildings to flush the toilets, to operate some of the air conditioning. And the net result was that the carbon emissions from those buildings were reduced by over 50%. Unlike here, the people in Berlin pay not only for their water and their wastewater, but also their stormwater runoff. So buildings were able to disconnect from their stormwater runoff, and therefore the residents saved money. So actually, the economics of it were interesting, because although it cost money to produce this, they were also saving money, as well as increasing the property prices, because they had this lovely urban lake, which in the summer was a boost for people actually living and working in that area of Berlin. And it just made such perfect sense. There was also green roofs on every single building in the development, and sometimes green facades. So, in terms of the environmental impact, it cut down dust. It actually, that part of Berlin during the summer has heat stress. It solved that, and it cut the running costs of the buildings. So, that's just one example. There are many around the world. I mean, we're not totally out of sync. I mean, one of the biggest sustainable drainage systems anywhere in the UK is actually in Craigavon, the balancing lakes, and those are used for leisure and for the people of Craigavon to walk around. So they're serving a drainage purpose, but they've also got this knock-on benefit of being a really good leisure facility for the people living in Craigavon.
John, it would be good if we could have some examples of that.
One to go see it.
And it's obviously when you've got a passion for that. But it led me on to the point that I wanted to make, because I don't see any outputs. And like Paul, it's good to see that there's going to be huge investment in the water infrastructure. But every year that we pick up on the media about the huge loss of water. I think it happens all over, but certainly in cities where people vandalising standpipes, that it has an impact on the essential services, trying to deliver a service and everything. But they've never been able to crack that vandalism, no matter how many times you think. And I think with a bit of effort to try and do that, you could save tens of thousands of litres of water every year.
Okay. Finally, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Chair. And I have waited and I have listened, and I'm delighted that I did, because I'm picking up on a few of the questions that were already asked, Kelly in particular, because that was the question I had written. And I suppose I'm posing it more in terms of, yes, there have been serious issues with at the height of the boom, if you like, and then the bust, and the developers who left the sites and they weren't signed off, as Kelly says. And I know you said, I think your words were spent money to save money, and surely it's incumbent now that we're all part of the one department, that you would come together with a policy. I hope it's not in necessarily a legislative change, but a policy change, that you would actually get out there and start the work to connect these sites, because I mean, I feel so sorry for the people who have purchased their houses and are not connected to the facilities, and I mean, that's a big issue that we're even in urban areas dealing with. So I'm hoping that you can give me some assurance that that's on the radar.
I mean, one of the big issues has been the bonds that are attached to this now. We're finalising a fairly major sewer bond review, because we're aware that there are a number of problems. Prior to 2007, there was a joint bond that the Department for Regional Development at the time took out, and that covered both roads and sewerage. Then when Northern Ireland Water came into being, so from 2007 on, the bonds were split, and the original sewer bonds were actually phased in. And so we've got a series of developments which, probably because of the development downturn, were left high and dry for a number of reasons. So there's some where the joint bond wasn't enough. There's some where the sewer bond wasn't enough to actually tackle the problems. And so the developer walked off site before finishing the sewerage, and Northern Water doesn't have enough money in the bond that it holds to complete the work, and it doesn't have any way of finding the money to do that, because it's not something that the regulator will allow it to put into its basket of charges. So we've been working with our colleagues in TNI, and certainly we have made a decision that where there's a joint bond pre-2007, that actually it's incumbent on the department to sort that out, and we're working through a number of sites. We are also looking at the level of bond now, and that legislation that I spoke about earlier, that we brought in earlier on this year, it will actually require developers to take out a sewer bond prior to construction, if ultimately they want Northern Water to adopt the sewerage, because there was a loophole in the legislation in the past where they could just go ahead and start building and then go to Northern Water late in the day and say, by the way, we need to connect.
Okay.
So we are trying to tighten up on this. But unfortunately, there are a number of sites where the developer never entered into a bond. And, legally, Northern Water cannot go in there and intervene, and that's a difficulty, because in effect it's the homeowners that are then responsible for those areas, or the developer, and if the developer's going bust, then that's a difficulty.
I know, and I suppose in terms of the Rivers Agency washing their hands of things, the Rivers Agency only deal with the flow, and I'm sure you know this, Chair, of what happens. If the flow in the river is interrupted, that's their baby. Anything else, don't want to know. So there's a difficulty, and I know you said the Department of Finance were responsible for the building regulations, which is true because I've dealt with them in the past, and anything up to Code 3, I know that's an old term now, they've probably moved away from it, but the Code 3 in the building code was that was legislated for. Anything 4 and 5 around SUDs or environmental improvements schemes around the properties, or a 4 and a 5. They weren't pursued through the legislative process to make it compulsory, because of the dangers at the time of damaging the contractors and the developers, in terms of putting pressure on them and more cost to them, and that it might chase them away. So, I do understand. Thanks,
Okay.
Chair.
Mr. Gervin, very briefly,
It's a consent to
finally.
It's a consent to discharge issue, which is one that I want to just check on. The consents to discharge, whether it be into a sewage system or into a storm drain system, can that not be seen and set down? Is there not a possibility to put that in regulation, that before a building can be occupied, that it must have that consent to discharge signed off? Because we have a problem with those consent to discharge where they're not, even septic tanks, because even if you have a septic tank, you still have to a consent to discharge from a septic tank into either a herringbone drain that you've made yourself or whatever, but you must have that. Is there any possibility, then it becomes a statutory responsibility of a solicitor to ensure that that's in place?
I suppose I would need to look more closely at exactly what's involved in the consent to discharge. I mean, that is something that certainly in terms of Rivers Agency would issue, but it's usually done prior to the plans being signed off. I mean, it's separate to, but aligned with the planning process.
But the planning process would issue or attach an informative to a planning decision to say that a consent to discharge will be required, but would not preclude occupation of a dwelling or commencement of a dwelling until that consent was in place. The planning process would follow different material considerations.
But I've seen, like Kelly has said and like Jenny has said, many developments where the developer has built the houses, and I'm thinking of one particular where there was almost 120 houses with no sewage connection whatsoever, to such a degree where he just created a cess pit, and he used to send a tanker up to pump it out once a week, and he did that for a period of time until the department were forced to actually put a pipe in, and he forced them to put the pipe in, and that's the point. He was able to do that without having all that. And that's, we're not going back historic. We're not going back very many years here. Those houses aren't that long occupied, but I'm telling you, that is the problem. 2007 it was.
Yeah, but certainly, you know, through the sewer bond review, we've been talking to people like the Law Society, and I think, to be fair, they have looked at this as an issue and are telling their members that, you know, if they are doing conveyancing for anybody buying a house, they need to be absolutely certain about the status of, you know, whether things are adopted or not, because the truth of it is, if a sewer hasn't been adopted and there is no bond, then ultimately the responsibility rests with the homeowner if something goes wrong. And that's a very hard message to give to somebody. If, you know, there's raw sewage floating around their back garden and you're saying, well, sorry, we can't do anything about it because it's not ours, we haven't adopted it, and we've no way to adopt it now because there isn't that formal process in place. And so that's why I think it was important that we tried to close whatever legal loophole we could in the legislation to really make sure that developers understood that they do need to sign up to, it's an Article 161, before they actually start their development, and make sure that that's in place.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your attendance and your time and answering questions.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, any other business?
It's a short meeting today.
Is tomorrow's arrangements, Chair?
Yes, tomorrow. Basically, the arrangements are that you're to be at the Laganside Bus Centre at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And does everyone know where that is, okay?
Maybe somebody should get Johnny directions directly to it, you know?
I don't know where Narrow Bridge is, so I don't know where Laganside is, but I'm sure I'll get directions.
Opposite where the old Oxford Street bus station.
Beside the
right,
Cosmos.
yes, where the big
Beside-
fish is.
beside the Cosmos, yeah, beside the Cosmos.
What's the fish?
Just across from the big fish.
Beside
Oh, well, then I'll
Tadford.
get to there.
Get the bus from Lisburn in the morning.
Jenny, beside Tadford.
Down at the
Oh, that beside the river, that big.
I know the big fish.
Got it.
Okay, members, I'll turn the meeting adjourned. Thank you.